Hello, fourth grade. Happy Friday. It's Ms. Kovarik, and this is Science Lesson 8. We are wrapping up our adaptations week, and we're going to be talking about how the habitat animals live in, the ecosystem they live in, how it affects which adaptations they have. So, I want to start with a little bit of plant review. So, we know the different parts of the plant. We've got the leaf, the fruit, the roots, the stem, and the flower. And we know that the flower and the fruit, those are usually grown in the same place, and that's also where the seed is found. The seed is how the plants reproduce, how they make more of themselves. The leaf is the plant part that gets that sunlight and makes food through photosynthesis. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The stem is kind of like a straw, and it sucks up water from the roots and it takes it to where it needs to go throughout the plant. And then the roots really anchor that plant inside the soil, and it absorbs water and nutrients from the soil. So what do plants need to live? Well, go ahead and think in your head right now. You should be thinking 3 things that plants need to survive. What do plants need to make food? First thing is carbon dioxide. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants are actually the opposite, which is why they're so healthy for us, because we need oxygen to live and we exhale, which means we breathe out carbon dioxide. So plants are producing oxygen, they are pushing it out into the air, and they're breathing in that carbon dioxide that we don't need. They also need sunlight. Sorry, got a runny nose. They need sunlight to make their food. If there is no sun, then they cannot have photosynthesis and they will not have any food to eat. They need water. They absorb that through the soil typically with their roots. What do they produce? We kind of just talked about this. So they take in that carbon dioxide, that sunlight, and that water, and through photosynthesis, they make oxygen and sugar. How do they do this? This is called photosynthesis. So it's a process that plants use to make food. They take in these 3 things and they produce these 2 things. The sugar is their own food. They don't go and hunt for food. They don't eat other plants. They make their own food through photosynthesis. All right, here's just a little diagram to help you understand a little bit more. Sunlight plus carbon dioxide plus water, that is photosynthesis. They produce sugar and oxygen, which is pushed off into the air, and we breathe that right back in. All right, so I want to talk about 2 different habitats, 2 different ecosystems, and what the plants and animals are going to need in those types of environments. So the first one is the tundra, and as you can see, the tundra is very cold. It's usually covered with snow or ice. Temperatures are very, very cold, especially in the winter. They're almost unbearable. So cold, harsh ecosystem. It's also called the Arctic. The poles are typically where this is. So if we have our Earth, up at the top of the poles is where the tundra is located. They have very harsh winds. So yes, it is cold, but those winds make that cold way, way worse. And it's also snow-covered usually. So animals in the tundra, if you're going to live in the tundra, you need to have enough adaptations to survive that cold and live in that harsh weather. So first they need some thick fur to keep them warm, and some animals like seals and whales, they also have that blubber, which is like a thick layer of fat that keeps them nice and warm. They're usually white colored to blend in with the snow, and that's called camouflage. So like polar bears, rabbits, foxes, stuff like that, they're usually white in the tundra and they blend in with the snow. Some animals migrate, which means to move to warmer places in the winter. So just like those birds go south in the winter, some animals that live in the tundra also have to leave for the winter as well. Or sometimes they hibernate, which is what bears do. They go into that long period of sleep, and before they do that, they eat a lot of food to get themselves enough energy to last through that hibernation. Then when they wake up, it's spring and there's more food for them outside. Here's some examples of some tundra animals. So as you can see, a lot of white colors, um, a lot of nice warm fur. All right, plants in the tundra. They're usually really small. So remember that the tundra soil is not like our soil. It's very hard. It can be frozen and it's not nice and warm and nourishing like ours is. So those plants are usually really small because the soil just doesn't have enough nutrients like ours does. They also stay close to the ground so they can absorb any heat that's coming up from the soil. And it's also small because if there's a lot of wind going on in the tundra, then they're going to need some protection from that cold wind. If they're really tall, that cold wind is going to knock that plant over and it's not going to survive. They also usually have short roots that grow this way, sideways. And like I just said, if they go too deep, they're going to hit that layer of permafrost, which is that frozen earth that root cannot go through. They also usually grow close together, and they do this because it protects them from the cold. Think about if you were outside without a coat. If you were to bundle up with a couple of friends, you guys would stay warmer because you're closer together. They usually have hairy stems, and this is a little bit weird, but those hairy stems actually help the heat stay inside of the plant. So kind of like the fur of an animal, that hair kind of insulates the heat, keeps the heat inside. It also protects the plant from the wind. Their leaves are usually really small and they're really waxy. So they're a waxy texture, and that helps keep the water inside because even though it does snow sometimes, it is still a really dry environment. So they need to be able to hold that water and save it. And some plants in the tundra don't even need soil to grow. So these are like fungi and algae. And those plants, instead of growing in the soil, they actually grow on rocks. Here's some examples of some plants in the tundra. All right, the desert is a very dry, they don't have much rain. This is actually kind of unknown. It can be hot or cold. Not all deserts are super hot like the one in this picture. They can be cold, but they get no rain, little to no rain, and they're very dry. If it's a hot desert, it's usually found near the equator, which is right in the center of the earth. Okay, desert animals. So remember, it's really hot. There might be some wind that's blowing that sand around. So desert animals have really long eyelashes, hairy ears, and their nostrils are usually not open like ours are. And this is to protect them from the sand. They usually have wide feet. Think of like a camel's feet. And this helps so that they don't sink in that sand. They're not on rough earth like we have here. It's sandy. It's lighter. They'll sink right through it if they're not wide enough. They can also go weeks without water, and this is important because they don't have a lot of water in the desert, and the water gets stored in their body to use when they need it. Their body temperature can change. They camouflage. They're often brown like the sand. And they do have thick fur because even though it can be hot during the day, once that sun goes down, it does get really, really cold. So they're going to need some fur to keep them warm. I don't know why it keeps doing that. All right, some desert animals, you see lots of brown. They're blending in with that sand. All right, plants in the desert, they usually have thick, waxy skin, and this keeps the water inside and it reflects the heat. We talked about how different types of colors and surfaces either reflect or absorb heat. In the desert, you want to reflect it so that the plant can stay cool. They have large stems to store water. They usually have thorns or spiky leaves, so think like cactus, and that keeps the water inside and it also keeps predators away. Their roots are usually deep or they can be long and shallow, and it spreads either far this way or far deep to reach where that water is. Also, plants are usually dormant at times, which means that they're alive, but they're not really growing. And this is because the desert doesn't have a great environment for plants to flourish. So they need to remain kind of asleep in a sense, so that they're not using up energy and they're just alive but not getting any bigger. All right, some plants in the desert. Lots of spikes. I'm sorry, guys, my nose is running like crazy. All right. So you're going to be on this form sheet. It's called Science Lesson 8. We're going to do a couple readings about photosynthesis. You're going to answer the multiple choice questions. So let me read these real quick. A closer look at photosynthesis. Just like people, plants need food and water to grow. However, how we think of food when we talk about what plants need is much different than the food we eat. Plants need sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide from the air in order to make their own food. This is a process called photosynthesis. A plant's leaves are where photosynthesis happens. So you're going to answer these questions. Which choice do plants not need to make food? So go back in the passage. Which one do they not need? What is photosynthesis? Go back in that passage. It's right there. What is photosynthesis? I also talked about it in the slideshow. All right. Second passage. Sunlight. Leaves are made up of millions of tiny cells. To see a cell, you need to look in a microscope. Each cell can have 1 to hundreds of chloroplasts. Inside each chloroplast is green chlorophyll. This is what gives leaves their green color. Chlorophyll is very important to photosynthesis. This is because it is the part of the plant that takes in sunlight. When we breathe, we take in oxygen from the air and let out carbon dioxide. Plants are the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen. Carbon dioxide is taken in by very small holes in a plant's leaves called stomata. Oxygen is released from the stomata as well. Water. Water travels into the roots, up the stem, into the leaves. Water mixes with the carbon dioxide and sunlight taken in by the plant's leaves. Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water work together to make sugar or food for the plant. The plant uses this food to grow. It also makes oxygen for people and animals to breathe. So you're going to tell me which plant structure makes food. True or false, do plants and humans both need oxygen to survive? Tell me which plant structure is like a straw that moves those nutrients throughout the plant. All right, and then at the end here, let me go to this one. So it says use the slideshow and video to help you. I'm going to post that slideshow in your assignment. Please use it. A lot of the information that you need is there. So I want you to imagine you're a plant in a really cold tundra. You're going to choose which adaptation would help you survive in your environment. So go back to that slide and find the answer. Next one, imagine you're an animal in the desert. Which adaptation would help you survive in your environment? Then you're going to choose an adaptation in this diagram. So you're going to choose either the thick waxy skin, the large stems, the spikes, or the roots. And you're going to tell me how that helps the cactus survive in the desert. All right, so you've got 8 questions today. Please make sure that you're reading the question, following the directions, and reach out to your teacher if you need help. I hope you guys have a great Friday, a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday. Bye, Adams.